Now is the time for the stand interview. If you have already attended the EDDs, you know about all the stands which organizers present to introduce their activities, to network. As this edition is online, the stands also have become virtual. And we're going to present one of the stands today, which is hosted by TradeMark East Africa. This organization supports East Africa's integration and trade by encouraging the reduction of barriers to trade, and it supports business competitiveness. And the stand presents a safe trade program to mitigate the impact of COVID. That's an initiative supported by the EU. So we're happy to have with us today Frank MATSAERT. Frank, you are the CEO of TradeMark East Africa. You've been leading this organization since it was established, I understand, in 2010. And I will ask you about the safe trade facility, but I will start with a general question on the topic. How is TradeMark East Africa promoting sustainable trade in Eastern Africa?
Well, thanks, Thibaut, and great to be with you today. Thanks for introducing me there. We aim to try to support sustainable trade through several ways. I mean, first of all, if you think about the way that you might increase trade, you're going to increase emissions. So what we're trying hard to do is to work with governments to find out ways how the carbon footprint of trade can be heavily reduced, particularly through tracking greenhouse gas emissions and trying to use modes of transport that are a lot cleaner. We also work with each of the governments, and we work across altogether 12 countries now, but also with regional institutions. So trying to work with them on the policies for adoption of cleaner technology and modes of transport. So that's pretty key. And then some focused interventions around how we can reduce emissions, particularly at big points of emissions, like, for example, the Port of Mombasa. That's a gateway to the transport corridor, where there's a real problem with pollution at the port, and also there's a problem with basically dust for the workers. So we've done quite a lot there to try to work on a green port policy and then the implementation. And again, the other thing we've been trying to do is to think very hard about green production and think about how goods can be basically produced more sustainably with a lower carbon footprint. So thinking about mini eco zones that, for example, are powered by renewables, particularly solar. And then, I think in terms of the sustainable aspect, and particularly inclusive, is we do a lot of work on the key trade arteries with poorer groups, particularly women traders at the borders.The, where goods are going from one state to the other. And often the women who are trading across those borders are very poor. And we do a lot of work in terms of trying to increase their incomes. Apologies for the dog barking behind me.
No problem, we could hear you well. I would like to ask you about the impact of COVID. Obviously, the Safe Trade facility is a response to the impacts of COVID. Can you elaborate on this? What have been the impacts in terms of trade and on your work?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. I mean, we did some research with the UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, and we did a piece of work with them that looked at the effects of COVID actually on trade in East Africa, and that covered Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. And it was quite interesting that compared to many other parts of the continent and many other parts of the world, trade was actually much more, resilient than we expected. And actually, we saw trade hold up much better than other parts of the world. But we did see some worrying things. First of all, because of the slowdowns and extra costs associated with trucks having to stop along the transport corridors, we saw quite an increase in the cost and time it took to move goods around the region, about a tripling. And then we also saw, poorer port performance because of the backlogs and various other factors. But basically, the time through the ports increased heavily. And that was on what we call the Northern Corridor, which is from the gateway port of Mombasa. The Northern Corridor carries about 70% of East Africa's trade. Then at Dar es Salaam, we actually, interestingly enough, we actually also saw a very similar thing. The other effects of COVID was obviously to impact on key sectors of the economy, particularly badly affected services, tourism, quite a lot also on construction. And in terms of trade, we saw a big hit, particularly on some of the poorer informal traders at the borders that I was talking about a minute ago. And we saw about a 97% decline in that, which is, really a problem. And we saw actually increases in domestic violence in those households. So we put together the Safe Trade Facility to try to address the pandemic. When it hit last February, we moved into action and put the $27 million program into effect within about a month. So we're really pleased about that. We did a mixture of short-term things and long-term things. Some of the things that we did included trying to get PPE, personal protective equipment, to the border agencies, particularly to those women traders, so that trade could increase, could continue rather. And the reason we did that is because otherwise people would have lost their jobs, their livelihoods, and poverty would have really increased more than it actually did in the end. So we gave a lot of PPE, great support from the EU, I really want to appreciate. And we also did a lot more work as well, thinking about how digital support could reduce the risks of infection. And we developed a thing called the Regional Electronic Cargo Driver Tracking System. It's quite a mouthful, but it was highlighted on CNN. And the whole idea was to track truck drivers so that they wouldn't carry the pandemic, and then that, their COVID tests could be on a blockchain and checked by the officials at the border. And that was really important to reduce infection rates. The other things we did in Safe Trade was to try to do some more medium-term things to underpin jobs and exports, and particularly, around the East African region. So those are some of the things that we did. And I think, I would reflect that we have much lower vaccination rates than other parts of the world here in Africa. And I talked to you from Nairobi. Unfortunately, the threat and the disruption of COVID is not going to go away anytime soon. And certainly our governments are projecting that it'll probably take another 3 years to reach a level where immunity is triggered through the vaccination rates. So this is going to be something that we're really going to have to think through in the longer run, and probably move to more vaccination programs and support, because obviously there's a shortage of vaccinations. Although we must say we do welcome the announcements of the G7 and others about the provision of extra vaccinations for the continent.
Thank you, Frank. That was very interesting. We have 1.5 minutes left. I would like to ask you an additional question. The impacts of the COVID crisis, of course, are not over. What is your recommendation for recovery plans, not only to boost trade, but also to make sure this is sustainable trade that comes back with the recovery from the crisis?
Okay, well, I think there's an opportunity to try to make trade much greener. And as I said, think about the transport policies and move goods around the continent in ways that are lower emitting. I think secondly, there's a great opportunity in terms of the recovery to produce more in Africa for Africa. And there's the pandemic showed that our manufacturers adapted very quickly to producing local PPE. Then I think there's a lot of opportunity in digital, and particularly bringing e-commerce on, but also moving a lot of paper-based systems onto digital to improve transparency. Excuse me. And finally, I'd say that actually there's a great opportunity also to try to work with governments to bring in much better policies around recognizing the benefits of green approaches to manufacturing and trade.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Frank. This is the end of the interview. I would like to invite anybody interested in the audience to visit your stand on DDD's website. Thanks again.